She deserves to know the truth. The Mafia boss was all smiles, until the black waitress spoke up. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night was just beginning to unfold, and the elegant lights of the upscale Manhattan restaurant shone like diamonds, casting their golden glow over the polished marble floors. The guests at Table 7 were the kind of people who knew power and status, their conversations flowing with ease, the clink of glasses a constant rhythm. But amidst the glamour, a storm was brewing, unnoticed by most, but not by Carla. Carla had been working at Morello's for 3 years, navigating the world of high society with a quiet grace. She had learned early that blending in was her best defense. But tonight, something felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man seated at the head of the table, Giovanni Romano, was someone she needed to watch. Giovanni, the Mafia boss, was known throughout the city for his sharp suits, piercing dark eyes, and the deadly reputation that followed him. He was a man who could make or break entire businesses with a single phone call. Carla had served him countless times before, always keeping her distance, never making waves. But tonight, as she approached the table with a bottle of wine, something in the air felt charged. As she poured the rich red wine into their glasses, she overheard a snippet of their conversation, and her heart stopped. Words like deals and betrayal floated in the air, and her sharp mind pieced them together. The Mafia boss was talking about a contract, a legal trap. The feeling of unease settled deeper. Carla wasn't just any waitress. Before life had led her here, she had been on a different path. She had studied law for a year before dropping out due to personal struggles. But the skills, the knowledge of legal terms and contracts, had never left her. And tonight, as Giovanni's voice lowered to a murmur, she recognized something familiar, a clause that could destroy him. Her hand trembled as she poured the wine. She had only seconds to decide. Speak up or stay silent. The temptation to stay silent, to avoid confrontation, was strong. But deep down, she knew that what was happening in that contract could change everything. She had to act. As she placed the bottle down, she caught Giovanni's eye. His gaze was cool, calculating, but she didn't look away. Her voice, soft yet firm, cut through the tension. Excuse me, sir, but this clause is a trap. The words hung in the air, and the room seemed to freeze. Giovanni's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, the power that radiated from him dimmed. The other guests were silent, watching the interaction with growing curiosity. Carla's heart raced, but she stood her ground, meeting his gaze. Giovanni's expression changed, and for the first time that night, he looked at her not as a mere servant, but as someone worthy of his attention. His smile returned, though it was now laced with intrigue. Explain, he said simply, his voice low. The power in his words wasn't lost on her, but there was something else there, respect. And for the first time in her life, Carla felt seen. I should not have said anything. That was the first thought that flashed through Carla's mind as Giovanni's intense gaze bore into her. Her heart raced, a cocktail of anxiety and anticipation flooding her veins. The words she had spoken, "Excuse me, sir, but this clause is a trap," still echoed in the air. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, standing before one of the most dangerous men in New York, a mafia boss known for his ruthlessness and control. His sharp, calculating eyes had shifted from being cold and distant to something else entirely. Intrigued, almost impressed. The other guests at the table, stunned into silence, exchanged glances, clearly waiting for the next move. But Carla could hardly process any of it. She could only focus on Giovanni, who hadn't yet broken his stare. His mouth twitched into the beginnings of a smile, but it wasn't one of mockery. It was something entirely different, a subtle shift that only added to the tension in the room. Explain. Giovanni's voice was calm but commanding. His words left no room for refusal. Carla's mind raced, her law school background kicking in, recalling everything she had learned about contracts, loopholes, and legal traps. She could see it clearly now, a clause buried in the fine print, designed to favor the other party while leaving Giovanni at a disadvantage. It wasn't just a bad deal. It was a setup. She opened her mouth to explain, but her nerves almost got the best of her. "It's in the dispute resolution section," she started, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "This clause limits your ability to contest anything in court. It forces you into arbitration and not with a neutral party. You're bound to an arbitrator of their choosing. It's stacked against you." Giovanni's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, dark and unblinking, never left hers. There was no flicker of recognition that she had spoken the truth, no acknowledgement that her words made sense. Just a cool, calculating silence. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Carla continued, the words flowing more easily now as she realized she was holding his attention. "It's a classic tactic. They're giving you no leverage. You sign this, and you've given up your power to control the outcome." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's a trap." Giovanni leaned back slightly, his fingers steepling in front of him. His face remained unreadable, but Carla could sense the wheels turning in his mind. She hadn't expected this reaction, had prepared herself for dismissal or anger. But instead, there was only quiet contemplation. The other guests at the table, still watching, exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to react. Giovanni shifted slightly, his chair creaking under his weight. Then, to Carla's surprise, he spoke again, this time softer but with an edge of curiosity. "How do you know this?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, Carla didn't know how to answer. She wasn't supposed to know these things, not after dropping out of law school. She wasn't supposed to be standing here, in the middle of this high-stakes world, analyzing contracts for the Mafia boss himself. But the truth was simple. "I used to study law. I know how these things work." Giovanni studied her for a long moment, his gaze narrowing slightly, as if weighing her words. There was a shift in his expression, something subtle, but unmistakable. His lips parted, and for the first time that night, his smile returned, though this time, it was different. It wasn't the smirk of a powerful man toying with a servant. It was a smile of acknowledgement, of respect. "You're smarter than you look," he said, his voice low, but with a trace of amusement. "Not many would have caught that. It seems I've underestimated you." The words sent a chill down Carla's spine, but it wasn't the fear she had expected. It was something else. Something that made her feel as if, just for a moment, she was on equal footing with him. The powerful Mafia boss, the man who controlled everything, was now looking at her differently. No longer just a servant. No longer invisible, but as someone who could challenge him. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers once again. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost intrigued. Carla swallowed hard, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She wasn't prepared for this. For him to look at her like this, as though she were more than just the woman who brought his food, poured his drinks. She wasn't prepared for the way his words made her feel both small and powerful at the same time. She shook her head slightly, not knowing what to say. "No," she replied softly. "I'm not." Giovanni studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing. Then, without breaking eye contact, he spoke again, his voice low but firm. "I want you to keep an eye on something for me." The sudden shift in his tone was jarring. "I'll make it worth your while. A woman like you, with your talents, could be useful in ways you haven't yet imagined." The offer hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Carla didn't know how to respond. This wasn't a world she ever imagined she would be a part of. She had been a law student, a woman with dreams, with a future. But now, standing here in this luxurious restaurant, facing the most dangerous man in New York, she realized she was no longer just dreaming. She was living a new reality, a reality where the rules had changed. And suddenly, everything was up for grabs. "I want you to keep an eye on something for me." Giovanni's words lingered in the air, heavy and filled with an undeniable weight. Carla's heart raced in her chest, her mind spinning, trying to process what had just transpired. The calm, almost amused Mafia boss, who only moments ago had been the figure of power and intimidation, was now offering her something she never expected. His gaze was unwavering, studying her, waiting for a response. Carla had always prided herself on keeping her emotions in check, but this moment was different. She could feel the gravity of the decision before her, and the pressure to respond correctly felt like an immense weight pressing down on her. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she finally asked, her voice steady. though inside she could feel her nerves beginning to unravel. Giovanni's lips curled into a smile, one that was neither kind nor mocking, but something in between. I need you to be my eyes and ears. There are people in my inner circle I do not trust, and I need someone who can observe without drawing attention. Someone like you. The suddenness of the request caught her off guard. She had never thought of herself as someone who could infiltrate such a world, let alone be trusted to gather information for someone like Giovanni. The thought of being involved in his operations, in his world, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Giovanni's next words shook her out of her thoughts. You don't have to be afraid. I'm offering you something you can't refuse. A position, a role in my organization, something more than just a waitress. Carla swallowed, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She wasn't just being offered a promotion or a better job. She was being asked to step into a world where the stakes were high, where the risks were dangerous, and where her every move could either propel her forward or be her downfall. What would I be doing exactly? She asked, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. Giovanni leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in front of him, the look on his face one of calm authority. You'll be gathering information, paying attention to the little things. In the world I live in, it's the small details that make the difference between life and death. He paused, his eyes darkening slightly. I've built my empire by knowing everything that's happening around me. But there are gaps in my knowledge, and that's where you come in. You'll blend in. You'll be invisible, just like you've always been. But this time, your silence will be valuable. The idea of becoming a part of his world, of stepping into a role that would require her to observe and report without drawing attention, made Carla's stomach twist. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, but there was something about Giovanni's confidence that made her want to trust him. The idea of being more than just a waitress, of having power and influence, was tempting, but the risk was so high. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Giovanni's smile didn't falter, but there was an edge to it now. If you refuse, you'll go back to being just another face in the crowd. Just another waitress, another invisible person in my world. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. But I know you. You're not someone who can just fade into the background. You're more than that, Carla. And I think you know that too. His words hung in the air, like a challenge, daring her to walk away from the opportunity he was offering. Carla knew that this was a turning point, a moment where her life could go in a completely different direction. She could walk away, remain in the safety of her ordinary life, or she could step into a world she knew nothing about, a world that would demand everything from her. For a long moment, she just stood there, her heart pounding in her chest as she weighed her options. Giovanni was still watching her, waiting for her decision. His calm demeanor never wavered, but there was an unmistakable sense of expectation in his eyes. Carla had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and in that moment, she realized that she didn't want to. This was her chance to prove herself, to take control of her future, to escape the life of invisibility that had always been her reality. Slowly, she took a deep breath and looked Giovanni in the eye. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm. Giovanni's smile returned, this time with a hint of approval. Good, he said, standing up from his chair. You've made the right choice. I knew you would. Now, let's talk about how you can start. As he began to outline the specifics of her new role, Carla's mind was racing. She was about to step into a world that would change everything she knew. The risks were enormous, but so were the rewards. And for the first time in a long time, Carla felt something she hadn't felt in years, excitement. This was her chance to rise above, to escape the limitations of her past, and to prove that she was capable of so much more. But she also knew that with this new role came responsibility. The choices she made from here on out would have consequences. Consequences that could affect not only her life, but also the lives of those around her. Giovanni was offering her a way out of obscurity, a chance to be seen. But it came with a price. And Carla was about to find out just how high that price could be. I'll start tomorrow, Giovanni said, his voice low but sure as he stood from his chair. The look in his eyes told Carla that the weight of what she had just agreed to was far greater than she could yet comprehend. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood what she was walking into. The world she was about to enter was one filled with power, danger, and a new set of rules that she had no experience navigating. Giovanni stepped closer to her, his gaze intense, his presence overwhelming. From now on, you're not just serving food. You're serving a purpose. You're part of something much bigger now. The words felt heavy, as if they were marking a moment of irreversible change. Carla stood there, frozen, still processing what had just happened. Do you understand? Giovanni's voice cut through her thoughts. Yes, she said, more out of instinct than confidence. The truth was, she wasn't sure what she understood. She wasn't sure if she was even ready for what Giovanni had promised. But the offer was out there, and the stakes were high. For the first time in years, she felt like she was being offered more than just survival. She was being offered a chance to rise, to matter, to be seen. Giovanni's lips curled into a slight smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Good. I'll have someone meet you tomorrow. They'll give you everything you need to get started. I trust you know how to keep things quiet. His words weren't a question. It was a command, and Carla knew that her life would never be the same again. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. Giovanni gave her a sharp look, almost as if inspecting her one last time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps echoing in the otherwise silent room. Carla remained where she was, still trying to wrap her mind around the situation. She wasn't sure if she had made the right choice, but she was certain of one thing. There was no turning back now. The next day, she received a call early in the morning. It was from a man she had never met, someone Giovanni had apparently set up to be her contact. He told her to meet him at a nondescript office building in the heart of the city. Come alone, the man had said, his voice cold and direct. Giovanni's orders. Carla had been given no instructions beyond that. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that the first step into Giovanni's world would be the hardest. As she arrived at the building, the reality of what she was doing hit her all over again. She stood outside the door, hesitating for a moment, before pushing it open and stepping inside. The office was plain, not what she expected for someone working for one of the most powerful men in the city. It was a small, windowless room with a single desk and a chair across from it. A man in a dark suit was sitting behind the desk, his face partially hidden in shadow. He looked up when she entered, his eyes scanning her quickly before he gestured to the chair. Sit, he said simply. Carla did as instructed, her hands gripping the edge of the chair to steady herself. The man didn't introduce himself, but she didn't expect him to. This wasn't about pleasantries. This was about business. He slid a folder across the table to her. Giovanni wants you to watch, listen, and report, he said, his voice businesslike. Everything you need is in that folder. You're to start tonight. Carla glanced at the folder. It was thick, filled with papers that she would have to read over and understand quickly. The weight of it felt like the weight of her decision, the gravity of what she had just agreed to. The man continued speaking, explaining the details of her new role. She would be keeping an eye on people within Giovanni's inner circle, gathering information, observing the behavior of certain individuals who were suspected of being disloyal. Do not make waves, he said. Do not make a scene. You are invisible. You are just a pair of eyes. Do not forget that. Carla nodded, the tension in her chest growing with every word he said. The man gave her a cold look, almost as if reading her mind. You don't have to do this. But Giovanni is not someone you want to disappoint. Do you understand? Carla swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. Yes. The man stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Then get to work. As Carla left the office, the reality of her new life began to settle in. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was part of a world that most people would never even see. A world where trust was earned, loyalty was bought, and power ruled everything. She knew it wouldn't be easy. In fact, she knew it would be dangerous. But as the door closed behind her, one thought kept repeating in her mind. She was finally in control of her own fate. She wasn't invisible anymore. I'm not sure what I expected when I walked into Giovanni's world, but it certainly wasn't this. The silence of the office, the cold, calculated look in the man's eyes, and the weight of the folder in my hands all felt like a sign of things to come. I had stepped into a world where nothing was as it seemed, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but I had no choice now. This was my reality. I didn't ask to be here, but now that I was, there was no turning back. The details of my assignment weighed heavily on me. Giovanni had trusted me with the eyes and ears of his empire. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a pawn in a dangerous game, and one misstep could cost me everything. But what struck me the most was the responsibility that came with it. I was being asked to watch, to listen, and to report. I had to be invisible, just a quiet observer, but one with information. That could change the course of everything. That night, my first mission began. I was instructed to attend a private dinner with a group of high-profile individuals connected to Giovanni's operations. They were people he considered potential threats, but they were also people he trusted, at least for now. My role was simple: observe. Don't engage, don't be noticed. Just watch for anything unusual. The dinner was set in an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city, a place where secrets were exchanged behind closed doors. As I arrived, the luxurious atmosphere overwhelmed me. The dim lighting, the polished marble floors, and the quiet hum of conversation made it clear that I was no longer in the world I once knew. Giovanni's people were everywhere, some of them watching from the corners of the room, others seated at the table where the conversation would unfold. I stood near the back, blending in with the staff, my eyes scanning the room, looking for any sign of danger. But what I didn't expect was the conversation that began to unfold right in front of me. It started innocently enough, with the usual pleasantries. But then, as the wine flowed and the mood shifted, I began to hear whispers, words that made my stomach tighten. Talk of alliances, betrayal, and power plays. These weren't just business deals. These were personal decisions that would affect lives, and I was in the middle of it. I stayed quiet, kept my distance, but I couldn't ignore the tension building at the table. As the evening progressed, the conversation grew darker. It became clear that there was a power struggle happening right under Giovanni's nose, a struggle that threatened everything he had built. I could feel the weight of the moment, the decisions being made that would shape the future of Giovanni's empire. My task was clear, but the information I was gathering felt like a burden. It wasn't just about watching. It was about understanding. Understanding the power dynamics at play, the alliances forming and breaking, and the lives that would be destroyed if things went wrong. At one point, I locked eyes with one of the men at the table. He was a tall, imposing figure, someone I had seen around Giovanni's inner circle but had never interacted with. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, and I could see the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He knew I wasn't just a waitress, but I couldn't let him know that I was more than I seemed. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on my duties, but the encounter left me uneasy. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one mistake, and Giovanni would no longer trust me. He would see me as a liability, and in this world, liabilities didn't last long. As the night wore on, I continued to listen, absorbing every detail, every word. I knew I had to report back to Giovanni, but I wasn't sure how much of this he already knew. Was this just a test to see if I could handle the responsibility, or was this the beginning of something much bigger? The dinner ended, and I returned to the office, the weight of my task still heavy on my shoulders. The man who had met me earlier handed me a small envelope. "Giovanni wants to hear your report," he said, his tone businesslike. I nodded, taking the envelope, and made my way out of the building. The city felt different now. The streets that once seemed familiar, even comforting, now felt foreign, filled with shadows and uncertainty. As I walked, I couldn't help but wonder what was coming next. I was in too deep to back out now. Giovanni had placed his trust in me, and I had to prove that I could handle it. But with every step I took, I knew that the danger was only growing. There were no guarantees in Giovanni's world, only loyalty and survival. I had to make my choices carefully. I wasn't just watching the world fall apart anymore. I was part of it. I had barely stepped inside Giovanni's office when I handed over the envelope, my fingers trembling despite myself. The weight of the situation, the secrecy of it all, seemed to settle deeper with every passing moment. Giovanni sat behind his desk, as calm and composed as ever, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes, the expectation. He opened the envelope without hesitation, pulling out the report I had written on the dinner. The words spilled out, detailed observations, quotes from the conversation, and most importantly, my conclusion. There was unrest in Giovanni's circle, an unspoken tension that could easily turn into a conflict if not carefully managed. Giovanni's eyes skimmed the pages as he listened, his expression never changing, but the silence was unbearable. When I finished, I waited, unsure of how he would react. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, and for a moment, I thought he might remain silent, as he had before, leaving me in the dark. But then, his lips parted slightly, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You did well," he said, his voice low but tinged with approval. "But I need more. We're not just watching for whispers. I need to know who's loyal. I need names." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, made my stomach drop. Names. I hadn't expected this. I was still processing the complexity of what was happening. The thought of betraying anyone in Giovanni's inner circle, of knowing things that could destroy careers or lives, made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "You want me to?" I started but couldn't finish. Giovanni's gaze was steady, and he nodded slowly. "Yes, I need you to tell me who is with me, who is plotting against me, who can't be trusted." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. I had never been asked to make decisions like this before, never been in a position where loyalty was life and death. But Giovanni wasn't just asking for information. He was asking me to decide who would stay and who would go, who would survive and who wouldn't. He was asking me to become more than just a witness to his empire. I was now a player in it, too. "It's not just about the whispers anymore," he continued, his voice sharpening. "It's about control. Everything you know, everything you see, it all matters. If you're going to do this, you'll have to make hard choices. Are you ready for that?" I swallowed hard, the pressure of the moment weighing on me. I wasn't sure I was ready for this, but I knew there was no turning back. I had already stepped into a world where the stakes were too high to back out now. "I'm ready," I said, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. Giovanni nodded, satisfied with my answer. "Good. Then let's see if you can do more than just observe. Let's see if you can make the hard calls." He stood up and walked toward the window, his silhouette framed by the city lights outside. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was watching me in the reflection. "You'll have a target tonight. Someone who's been with me for a while, but I'm starting to question. You'll need to find out if they're truly loyal or if they're playing both sides." I didn't ask for details, didn't ask for names. Giovanni didn't offer them. He didn't need to. He didn't trust anyone fully, and I realized that I was now one of the few people he did trust, even if that trust was still new and untested. "Tonight, you will act," he said, his voice low but firm. "Get the information you need. If you want to stay in this world, you'll have to prove yourself. There is no room for weakness." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me to face the reality of what I had just agreed to. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a turn I could never undo. The power Giovanni held, the danger that loomed over everything, was real, and I was no longer just an observer. I was now a part of it. That night, I found myself once again standing on the edge. My task was clear: find the truth, and make sure Giovanni knew it. As I entered the target's office, the tension in the air was thick. They were waiting for me, but what they didn't know was that I was no longer just a waitress. They had no idea that I was now Giovanni's eyes and ears. And in this world, loyalty was everything. Without it, survival was impossible. I knew I had to make my choice. Was this person truly loyal to Giovanni, or were they a threat hiding behind a mask of friendship? I had to find out, and I had to do it quickly, before things got even more dangerous than they already were. As I stepped into the dimly lit office, my heart was racing. I wasn't just stepping into a room. I was stepping deeper into a world where everything I knew could change with a single word, a single action. And tonight, I was going to make sure Giovanni's empire stayed intact, no matter what it took. I stepped into the office, the tension in the air thick with unspoken words. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing, analyzing every small detail as I tried to prepare myself for what was about to happen. Giovanni had given me a task, and now it was time to prove myself. The man I was here to meet was one of Giovanni's trusted associates, but there had been whispers. People were saying that he might be working for someone else, feeding information to the enemy. I couldn't afford to let him get away with it. If Giovanni was right, this man was a liability. And in the world I was now a part of, liabilities didn't last long. The office was dark, a single desk lamp casting shadows on the walls. The man, Thomas, was sitting at the desk, his back to me, his fingers tapping lightly on a stack of papers. He didn't notice me at first, and I took the opportunity to study him. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that could blend into a crowd but also command attention when needed. He had been with Giovanni for years, but something about him didn't sit right with me. I could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders were slightly hunched, like he was carrying a burden. A burden of secrets. I cleared my throat, and he turned around, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Carla," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge. "What brings you here?" I stepped forward, keeping my expression neutral. "Giovanni sent me. He needs to know something." I watched as his eyes flickered for a moment, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. He wasn't as calm as he seemed. He knew what was coming. "I thought Giovanni trusted me," he said, his voice a little colder now. "I've been with him from the beginning." I didn't answer right away, just let the silence stretch between us. This was a test, one that would determine everything. He had to feel the weight of the decision I was about to make. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was the one who could expose him, or I could let him go and continue living in Giovanni's world of shadows. "I think Giovanni is starting to have doubts," I finally said. His expression didn't change, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Doubts? About me?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, but I didn't flinch. I knew this was coming. "I don't like where this conversation is going," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You need to tell Giovanni that I'm loyal. I've always been loyal." I took a step closer, my voice steady. "You've always been loyal, haven't you? But loyalty can be a fragile thing, Thomas. One mistake, and everything changes." He stepped back, his face hardening, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. He was starting to realize that I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I wasn't just someone who followed orders. I was part of the game now. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, his voice colder, more defensive now. "What I'm trying to say," I began, "is that Giovanni is watching everyone. He's always watching. And if there's even the slightest chance that you're not who you say you are, then you're a threat to him. And threats, well, they don't last long." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge my sincerity. For a moment, I thought he might try to deny it, try to twist his way out of the situation. But instead, he let out a breath and shook his head. "You're right," he said, his voice a little softer now, as if he had just resigned himself to the truth. "I've been playing both sides. I didn't want it to go this far, but I was cornered. They offered me more than Giovanni ever could." The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew it. There was something off about him, something that didn't quite fit. I had been right to doubt him. I wasn't just imagining it. But now that I had this information, what was I going to do with it? Giovanni had trusted me with this mission, but I knew that revealing Thomas's betrayal would come with consequences. I wasn't sure if I was ready for those consequences, but I didn't have a choice. I had to make the decision. I had to choose whether or not to expose him. "You'll be taken care of," I said quietly, trying to mask the uncertainty in my voice. "But Giovanni will want you gone. If you're really sorry, then this is the only way out." He didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply nodded, his face a mask of resignation. "I understand." As I turned to leave the office, my heart was still racing, my mind reeling from the weight of the decision I had just made. I had made my first real choice in Giovanni's world. And now, there was no turning back. The door clicked shut behind me, and I took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. Giovanni's world was dangerous, but it was also where I belonged now. There was no going back to being invisible. I had crossed the line, and I would never be the same again. I walked into Giovanni's penthouse, feeling the weight of what had just transpired. The decision I made last night, the information I had gathered, it was all real now. The world I had stepped into wasn't just one of luxury and power. It was one that demanded sacrifices and choices, each with consequences that could change everything. Giovanni had promised me a place in his empire, but that came with a price I had yet to fully understand. Tonight, he had summoned me again, his message short and direct. "Meet me in my office. It's time to talk." The moment I entered the office, I could tell things were different. The atmosphere was charged, more intense than usual. Giovanni was seated at his desk, his hands clasped in front of him, his face calm, but his eyes sharp, watching me carefully. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just another person in his world. I was someone he was actively scrutinizing. "You've done well," Giovanni said, his voice low, but the praise didn't feel like it usually did. There was something else beneath it, something heavier. "You've proven that you can handle the work. But now, we need to discuss where you go from here." I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady. though I could feel the uncertainty stirring inside me. Giovanni leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving mine. I need you to make a choice, he said. A decision that will determine your future with me. There's a position opening up, one that requires someone with both intelligence and loyalty. Someone who can handle power without being overwhelmed by it. That someone could be you. My heart raced as I processed his words. A position? Giovanni had never made it clear that this was more than just watching and reporting. I'm ready, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was. What did he expect from me? What did this position really mean? Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly, studying me as if trying to gauge my sincerity. It means you'll be responsible for more than just information. You'll be in charge of making decisions, of dealing with those who threaten my operations. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. There will be times when you'll have to make difficult choices. People will challenge you, test you, and you'll have to decide who stays and who goes. You will become an extension of me, an ally I trust completely. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was what I had wanted, right? A chance to be more than just an observer, to finally have a say in the decisions that shaped Giovanni's world. But the responsibility, the power, it was overwhelming. I understand, I said, my voice unwavering, even though a part of me was still unsure. Giovanni studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. Good. I'm glad you understand. But before you can take on this responsibility, there's one more test you need to pass. A final decision to make. He stood from his desk and walked toward a cabinet, pulling out a thick file. He placed it on the desk in front of me and opened it. The pages inside were filled with names, faces, and information about people within Giovanni's circle, some loyal, some not. I need you to look through this file, Giovanni said. There are people in my organization who have been disloyal, people who have worked against me behind my back. I need you to make the decision. Who stays? Who goes? My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't what I had expected. I had thought that once I proved myself, once I was in, everything would fall into place. But this was about cutting ties, making choices that could destroy people's lives. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I can't do this, I said, my voice shaking. Giovanni looked at me, his expression softening just slightly. You can, Carla. You've already proven that you have the intelligence to make these decisions. Now you need to prove that you have the will. I looked down at the file, the faces staring back at me. These were people I had worked with, people I had seen around Giovanni's mansion, his office. Some of them had been kind to me, others indifferent. But now I was supposed to choose who would remain and who would fall. The thought made my stomach turn. How do I know who to trust? I asked quietly. Giovanni walked over to me, his presence looming. You don't always know, but you have to learn to trust your instincts. Loyalty is a fragile thing. It's about more than just words. It's about actions, choices, and when the time comes, who stands by you. I nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. I had no idea how I would make these choices. But I knew one thing for sure. Giovanni was right. Loyalty was everything. And I had to choose where mine lay, with him or against him. The next few moments were the longest of my life. I flipped through the file, studying the names, trying to make sense of it all. Each name carried weight. Each face a story I had yet to fully understand. And with every page, the realization hit me harder. This was real. There were no second chances. When I finally closed the file, I looked up at Giovanni, my decision made. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady now. Giovanni's smile returned, but it wasn't the smile of a man who had just won a victory. It was the smile of someone who had seen the depth of my decision. Good, he said, his voice low and approving. Then welcome to the inner circle, Carla. You've earned your place. I had made my decision. Giovanni's words echoed in my mind as I sat in his office, the weight of what I had just agreed to starting to settle in. The faces in the file I had just studied were still fresh in my mind, each one carrying the potential to either stay loyal or betray him. There was no room for hesitation now. I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant in a game where the rules were simple: trust no one, and trust everyone equally. Giovanni had made it clear, this wasn't a world for the weak. The power he held over everyone, including me, was palpable. And now, I was a part of it. You're quiet today, Giovanni's voice broke through my thoughts. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city. His back was to me, but I could feel his presence like a weight in the room. Thinking about your decision? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could explain the storm raging inside me. It's just a lot to take in, I said, my voice steady but unsure. Giovanni turned to face me, his expression unreadable. Of course it is. You've just taken your first step into my world. You're no longer invisible, Carla. You're part of something much bigger now. The question is, do you have what it takes to survive it? I met his gaze, the challenge in his words making my pulse quicken. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, though I couldn't help but feel the weight of my words. The truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready for what lay ahead, but I had no choice now. Giovanni smiled, a small, knowing smile. Good. Then prove it. He motioned for me to follow him as he walked toward his desk. He reached for a thick envelope and handed it to me. This is your next assignment, he said. I need you to deal with someone who's been causing problems. They've been working with rival families, undermining my influence. It's time to make them choose a side. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in my hands. And what exactly am I supposed to do with this person? I asked, already knowing the answer. Giovanni's smile grew colder. You'll figure it out. Just make sure the message is clear. Disloyalty is not tolerated in my world. The envelope contained an address, along with a brief note detailing the person's involvement with rival families. The task seemed simple enough, but I knew better. Nothing in Giovanni's world was ever simple. As I left his office, the weight of the task ahead was heavier than ever. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and now I was responsible for making sure Giovanni's empire remained intact. I was no longer just a spectator. I was a player, and in this game, every decision had consequences. I arrived at the address late that night. The building was old, tucked away in a forgotten part of the city. It felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. The dim lighting, the musty air, it all gave off a sense of danger, like I was walking into a trap. I wasn't here to negotiate. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to deliver a message, and I intended to do just that. The man I was looking for was in his office, sitting behind a desk cluttered with papers. He didn't even look up when I entered, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew why I was here. Giovanni sent you, didn't he? The man said, his voice low and resigned. I didn't answer right away, just stood there, watching him. He finally looked up, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. You're here to make me choose, aren't you? I stepped forward, placing the envelope on the desk. Giovanni doesn't tolerate disloyalty, I said quietly. And neither should you. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. I didn't mean for things to get this far, he said, his voice shaking. I just wanted more power, more control. I never wanted to cross Giovanni. I didn't respond. He wasn't the first person to make excuses, and he wouldn't be the last. People always thought they could get away with betrayal, that they could play both sides without consequences. But Giovanni had made it clear that was never an option. You've already crossed a line, I said, my voice cold now. And now you have to pay for it. The man stood up, his hands raised in surrender. Please, don't do this. I'll fix it. I'll make things right with Giovanni. I shook my head, my expression hard. It's too late for that. I reached for the envelope and opened it. Inside was a photo, a final message from Giovanni. The decision had already been made. The man's fate was sealed. As I left the building, I could feel the weight of the task pressing on me. I had delivered the message, but the truth was, it was never just about loyalty or betrayal. It was about survival. Giovanni's world didn't have room for weakness, and I was learning that the hard way. This wasn't just about power. It was about control. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the only way to stay in Giovanni's world was to become a part of it completely. There was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. I had crossed that line, and now I had to live with the consequences. I woke up the next morning with a weight on my chest that felt heavier than ever before. The night had been a turning point, the kind of moment in Giovanni's world that you could never take back. I had delivered the message, made the call, and decided a man's fate. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt numb. The silence in my apartment felt deafening. The walls were closing in, and I could hardly breathe. The realization hit me harder than I expected. This was the life I had chosen. There was no going back now. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was part of a machine, a system of power and betrayal, a world where loyalty was everything, but so easily discarded. As I walked into Giovanni's office later that morning, the tension between us was palpable. His calm demeanor was still there, but I could sense the underlying expectation in his eyes. He was watching me closely, waiting for something. "You did what had to be done," he said as I entered, his voice as cold as ever. "But there are consequences. There always are." I stood in front of his desk, trying to steady my breath. I had expected him to say something about the job I had done, maybe even praise me for my loyalty. But all I got was the reminder that I was always one misstep away from losing everything. "I did what you asked," I said, my voice firm despite the unease running through me. Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's not just about doing what I asked, Carla," he replied. "It's about what you're willing to do next. Loyalty isn't a one-time thing. It's ongoing. And every day, you'll be tested." I felt the weight of his words settle deep in my chest. Every day? The thought of it was overwhelming. "You're not just a part of my world now," Giovanni continued. "You're one of the few people I trust. But trust doesn't come without a price. You'll have to prove yourself every day. Prove that you're worthy of the position I'm offering you." His gaze was unwavering, and I could feel the pressure of his expectations weighing on me. The file he handed me was thicker than before, filled with new faces and names. People who had to be watched. People who could no longer be trusted. The file was my new reality. Every name inside it represented a decision, a test. "These people are too close to the fire," Giovanni said, his voice low. "They've betrayed me, or they're planning to. It's your job to find out who and deal with them." The words hung in the air like a sentence I couldn't escape. The task was simple in theory. Expose the disloyal, get rid of the threats. But there was nothing simple about it. The consequences of failure were too high. I nodded, the silence between us growing thick as I took the file. Giovanni was testing me, pushing me further into the depths of this world, where loyalty wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. And like any weapon, it could turn on you at any moment. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls, meetings, and more decisions to make. My mind raced as I read through the file, trying to keep track of everyone I had to keep an eye on. Some of the names were familiar. Others were new, people I had never heard of. But they all had one thing in common. They were all suspects. Every interaction, every word spoken could be the key to uncovering who was truly loyal and who was plotting against Giovanni. That night, Giovanni sent me to a nightclub in the city, a place where business and pleasure often blurred. I was to observe, listen, and report back on the conversations I heard, on the deals being made behind closed doors. It was a world I hadn't yet fully understood, but one I was beginning to feel I was being shaped for. As I entered the club, the music thumped in my chest, the lights flashing in time with the beat. The atmosphere was thick with tension, with people who had something to hide, something to protect. I wasn't sure who I was looking for, or what I was supposed to hear, but I knew one thing. I had to stay invisible. If I made the wrong move, if I showed even a hint of hesitation, I would become a target. The night stretched on, and I moved through the crowd, a ghost among the living. My eyes never stopped moving, watching, listening for anything that could give me a clue. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me too, but I couldn't afford to be distracted. Giovanni trusted me to gather information, but he also trusted me to be a part of something bigger. As I finally found a quiet corner, I overheard a conversation between two men. One of them was someone from Giovanni's inner circle. The words they spoke were quiet but clear. Betrayal was in the air. A deal had been made behind Giovanni's back. The man I had been sent to observe had been selling information to a rival family. I felt a chill run through me as the realization hit. This was what Giovanni had warned me about. This was the moment I had to make a choice. I could go back and report what I had learned, or I could turn a blind eye and let the betrayal unfold. But there was no going back from either decision. I knew I had to act. Giovanni had trusted me with his empire, and now it was up to me to protect it. The power was in my hands, but so were the consequences. The choice was mine, and for the first time, I understood what Giovanni meant when he said loyalty had a price. And I had just paid mine. I walked out of the nightclub, the cool night air hitting my skin as I processed everything I had just witnessed. My heart was still racing from the conversation I overheard, the confirmation of the betrayal that was already in motion. It wasn't just a matter of a few whispered words or a quiet deal. This was an all-out attempt to undermine Giovanni's empire, a move that could have far-reaching consequences. The decision weighed heavily on me as I made my way back to Giovanni's penthouse. I couldn't shake the images of the two men, one of them from Giovanni's inner circle, conspiring behind his back. I had seen it before, the subtle shifts in behavior, the way some people thought they could get away with disloyalty in the shadows. But now, I was in a position to do something about it. The truth was clear. Giovanni couldn't afford to let this slide. He needed to know who was with him and who was against him. The lines had been drawn, and now it was up to me to decide who would survive in his world. When I arrived at Giovanni's penthouse, the door was already open, and he was waiting for me, his back to the large window that framed the city skyline. His posture was as calm and confident as ever, but there was something in the air tonight, an unspoken tension that seemed to hang between us. He turned as I stepped inside, his gaze locking onto mine. "Did you hear what you needed to hear?" he asked, his voice steady, though I could sense the underlying impatience. I nodded, my breath still unsteady from the intensity of the situation. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice firm, though inside, I was fighting the nerves threatening to overwhelm me. Giovanni's eyes never left me. "So, what's your conclusion?" His question was sharp, but not harsh. He was testing me. The room was silent as I processed my thoughts. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment where everything I had learned, everything I had observed, would finally matter. "There's a traitor in your circle," I said, my voice steady now, as the weight of the situation settled in. Giovanni didn't react immediately. He just stared at me, as if waiting for me to continue. I took a deep breath and explained what I had overheard, how the deal was already set in motion and how one of his trusted men had been selling information to a rival family. Giovanni's gaze darkened as I spoke, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes calculating, as if weighing the situation, considering every possible outcome. "And what would you do about it?" he asked finally. I knew what he was asking. He wasn't just looking for answers. He was looking for loyalty. He was looking for someone who could make the hard choices, who could take the power he had given them and use it without hesitation. "I'll handle it," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could second-guess them. Giovanni's lips twitched in approval, but there was no smile. He wasn't here to give praise. He was here to test me. "I'm counting on you to be decisive," he said, his voice low, a warning in it now. "There's no room for hesitation. If you fail, it's not just your life on the line, it's mine, too." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in my chest. This wasn't just about the task at hand. This was about proving myself to Giovanni, to this world that didn't care for weakness. There was no room for doubt, no time for second thoughts. I had crossed the line, and now there was no going back. "I won't fail you," I said, more to myself than to him. Giovanni watched me for another moment, his eyes unreadable, before nodding slightly. "Good. Then go. You know what needs to be done." As I turned to leave, the weight of the decision pressed down on me. I was walking into the heart of Giovanni's empire, the place where loyalty was everything and betrayal was punished without mercy. There was no room for mistakes, no room for hesitation. The life I had once known, the quiet, the safety, was gone. This was my world now, a world where every decision mattered, and every choice could mean life or death. The next few days would determine everything. I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the system, part of the power that held everything together. And now, I had to make sure it stayed that way. Giovanni had trusted me with more than just information. He had trusted me with his empire, and I wasn't about to let that trust be broken. But as I prepared for what was to come, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Giovanni's world was dangerous, and the higher I climbed, the more I realized how easily it could all come crashing down. I was in too deep to turn back now, and that, more than anything else, made me feel both powerful and vulnerable all at once. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the weight of what I was about to do kept me awake. Giovanni's empire had been built on blood, loyalty, and power. Now, it was my turn to protect it. I had a decision to make. The betrayal I uncovered wasn't just a small mistake. It was a calculated move that could destroy everything Giovanni had worked for. And now, I had to fix it, clean up the mess before anyone else realized what had happened. The following evening, Giovanni's words echoed in my mind as I walked down the narrow hallway of the dimly lit building. His voice had been unwavering when he handed me the responsibility. "There's no room for hesitation," he had said. If you fail, it's not just your life on the line, it's mine, too. I reached the office door, my heart pounding as I paused before knocking. The man who had betrayed Giovanni, the man who had thought he could get away with working with a rival family, was inside. I had to confront him, and I had to do it now. As I stepped into the room, I immediately saw the fear in his eyes. The man, Frank, was sitting at his desk, his hands visibly shaking. He knew why I was here. The tension in the room was suffocating. I didn't speak right away, just stared at him for a moment, letting the silence hang between us. He couldn't meet my gaze. I didn't mean for this to happen, he muttered, his voice shaking. Giovanni wouldn't understand. I was just trying to survive, to protect myself. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I didn't feel sorry for him. In Giovanni's world, there was no room for weakness, no room for apologies. You made a choice, I said coldly, my voice steady. And now you have to deal with the consequences. Frank's eyes flickered with fear, and he stood up, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. Please, Carla, you don't have to do this. I can fix it. I'll make things right with Giovanni. Just give me a chance. I stepped closer, the space between us growing smaller. He could see it in my eyes now. There was no going back. Giovanni doesn't trust people who fail him, I said, my voice low and deliberate. And you failed him. You failed all of us. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just stood there, shaking. I felt nothing. No empathy, no pity. Just a cold, unshakable truth. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. The task before me was clear, but the decision still gnawed at me. I had to decide how far I was willing to go to protect Giovanni's empire. I had to decide whether I could follow through with Giovanni's expectations. I had to make sure no one would ever question my loyalty again. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small envelope that Giovanni had given me earlier that day. I slid it across the desk, watching as Frank hesitated before picking it up. The envelope contained the final instructions, the price of his betrayal. You know what needs to be done, I said, my voice firm. Take it, or face the consequences. Frank's hands shook as he opened the envelope, his face going pale as he read the contents. The reality of the situation hit him hard. He knew what Giovanni wanted. He knew what would happen if he didn't comply. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear, but I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. He had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I'll do it, Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll make it right. I'll fix it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision. He had no other choice. The consequences of his actions had already been sealed. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of his footsteps following me, but I didn't look back. Giovanni had trusted me with this task, and I would not fail him. I knew this world, this empire, was dangerous, but it was also mine now. My loyalty to Giovanni wasn't just a matter of survival. It was about something bigger, something I had yet to fully understand. But tonight, I knew I had made the right choice. The world Giovanni had built wasn't just about power and control. It was about survival, loyalty, and knowing when to make the hard decisions. And I had made one tonight. I had proven my worth to Giovanni. I had shown him that I could be trusted. The only question now was how far I was willing to go to protect what I had earned. Giovanni's world was mine now, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. I sat alone in Giovanni's office, the city lights casting long shadows across the room as I replayed everything that had happened in the past few days. The weight of my choices still pressed heavily on me. I had proven myself to Giovanni, but at what cost? The life I had stepped into wasn't one I could ever escape from. I had made my mark, made decisions that would change the course of Giovanni's empire, but I couldn't help but wonder if I was still just a pawn in his game, or if I had finally become a true player. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and I could almost hear Giovanni's voice in my mind, reminding me that loyalty was everything and betrayal was a death sentence. I had already made the hard choices, each one more difficult than the last, but now I had to deal with the aftermath. Giovanni's empire was growing, and I had become one of its most trusted pieces. But trust was a fragile thing, and I knew that I had to continue proving myself every day, or I could easily be discarded. It was the nature of this world. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching, pulling me from my thoughts. Giovanni entered the room, his usual calm demeanor still intact. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching me. You've done well, he finally said, his voice low but with a trace of approval. Better than I expected, actually. I didn't respond right away, still trying to process his words. Giovanni was rarely effusive with praise, and the weight of his approval carried more significance than anything else. You've earned your place in my world, he continued, his gaze never leaving me. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's always more to do, more to prove. I nodded, understanding the implications. The life I had chosen would never be one of rest. It was a constant battle for survival, and the price of loyalty was higher than I had ever imagined. Giovanni turned and walked toward the window, his back to me. There are people who want what we have, he said quietly. People who will stop at nothing to see this empire fall. I felt a chill run through me as I realized just how much bigger this world was than I had initially understood. Giovanni wasn't just talking about his enemies. He was talking about the fragile nature of power itself. I had entered a world where everyone was trying to climb higher, and the higher you went, the more dangerous it became. And you'll be right there with me, Giovanni continued, his voice steady. You've shown that you can handle it. But now, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. In this world, everyone has to choose a side. I was silent, the weight of his words settling over me. It was the truth. In Giovanni's world, there were no neutrals. There were no bystanders. Everyone had to choose. I've made my choice, I said finally, my voice firm. I'm with you. I always will be. Giovanni turned back to face me, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. For a moment, I wasn't sure if he believed me. But then, he nodded, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Good, he said. That's what I like to hear. The conversation shifted after that, and we discussed the next steps, the plans for the future. But something had changed between us. I had crossed a line, but I wasn't just a tool anymore. I was part of the inner circle. I was someone Giovanni trusted. And in his world, that meant everything. As I left his office, the weight of the decision still hung over me. I had made my choice. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what the future held. I had earned Giovanni's trust, but at what cost? Loyalty in his world wasn't just a virtue. It was a weapon. And weapons, no matter how loyal, had a way of being turned against their wielder. The next few weeks were a blur. The tension between Giovanni's allies and enemies grew more palpable every day. Whispers of betrayal spread, and I found myself becoming more and more involved in the decisions that shaped Giovanni's empire. There were no more easy choices, no more simple answers. Each day brought new challenges, new tests. And through it all, I felt Giovanni's watchful gaze on me, never giving me a moment's rest. I had become something more than just an observer in this world. I had become a force in it. But I wasn't sure if that made me stronger or more vulnerable. Giovanni's empire was built on loyalty, but loyalty was a fragile thing. And in a world like his, even the smallest crack could bring everything crashing down. As I stood there, looking out over the city from Giovanni's penthouse, I realized just how deep I was in. There was no turning back. This was my life now, and I had to live with the choices I made. Loyalty, power, and betrayal. They were the pillars of Giovanni's world. And now, they were the pillars of mine. Explore the thrilling and emotional journey in this captivating narrative, filled with intrigue, power, and the complexities of loyalty. In this gripping tale, the protagonist finds herself pulled into a world where every decision holds immense weight, and loyalty is tested at every turn. The story delves deep into the challenges of maintaining trust in a high-stakes environment, with betrayals and power struggles shaping the fate of those involved. As the protagonist navigates this treacherous world, romance stories begin to intertwine with the dangerous game of power, adding an unexpected layer of complexity to her journey. The narrative builds on the delicate balance between loyalty and betrayal, with every decision leading to new twists and turns. As alliances are tested and loyalties are questioned, the protagonist must make decisions that could change her life forever. In the end, she realizes that even in a world as harsh as this, the power of connection and trust remains paramount. Through the lens of romance stories, we explore not just power struggles, but the deep emotional connections that can form amidst danger and deception. This is a tale where the lines between power and passion blur, and where loyalty and love collide in the most unexpected ways.